On the west side of the building. He's contained. We got multiple officers inside the building at this time. He believes he's barricaded in one of the offices. Messed up is still shooting.
Still shooting, and police were waiting outside. That was just a snippet of the newly released body cam footage showing the police response, or lack thereof, to the attack on Robb Elementary School in Uvalde. 21 died, including 19 students. The footage, in conjunction with the surveillance footage released last week, reveals exactly what police did. More importantly, what they did not do in those 77 minutes before a Border Patrol agent killed the shooter. Now, another investigation is underway. The Texas legislature has already put out their preliminary report. Allie Bradley was there on scene as the shots were ringing out and joins us now. Your sources in law enforcement that are now seeing and hearing what happened while they were there and outside, inside, and arrived late, are they feeling unsupported, or are they feeling like this examination is necessary?
Well, Leland, a lot of them are criticizing the response as well. I do have an agent that was present. From the beginning, he maintained that he was outside breaking windows to extract people. So he hasn't had a lot to say about the response. However, I do know a parent who is one of my sources of a third grader that was outside that witnessed the shooter jumping over the fence. And this parent is actually a former Border Patrol agent, Leland, and he tells me he's most disappointed in the Border Patrol agents because he said, some of these local departments might not have adequate training, but he said Border Patrol agents know what to do. They know what they're doing. We saw the massive response from Border Patrol, almost 200 agents, I believe. So he is the most disappointed in Border Patrol right now.
And we need to separate this to be accurate. There were individual acts of heroism. I'm thinking about the Border Patrol agents whose hat has a bullet through it, who ended up going through the door 77 minutes later and finally killed the suspect. And then I'm thinking about the overall response, which was pathetic, disorganized, cowardly at times, and certainly allowed more to die. What are you hearing from in Uvalde about accountability and who's going to get fired over this going forward?
Well, today, Leland, there was actually a special meeting held ahead of the planned school board meeting, and the community came out in force and called for basically the resignation of everyone involved. Specifically, they want the superintendent, Dr. Harrell, to resign, they want the school board to resign, they want obviously Arredondo to resign, who right now is still on paid leave. So they want accountability, and they want to know who's going to be held accountable moving forward. They say that, is everybody just going to be the same cast of characters? Because they say if that's the case, they don't feel safe doing that. A lot of law enforcement individuals I talk to say that the only way to gain trust from the community is to rebuild. But the problem is, where are these men going to get jobs elsewhere? These surrounding areas, they're not going to put trust in them either because of their inaction.
Well, in the same place, where are you going to get all the new officers from? Because Uvalde is a small town, 13 or 14,000 people, an hour from San Antonio, an hour from the border. There's not much there in terms of finding new people. As we talked about, there were people who wanted to go in. Take a listen to one of the body cams saying that.
He's already in the classroom. You got me, right?
You okay?
Yeah.
You okay?
He's in the class. Dude, we gotta get in there.
DPS is sitting there, people.
We gotta get in there. He just keeps shooting. We gotta get in there.
And then evidently, Pete Arredondo, who's the incident commander, told people to stand down or stand back.
Well, Leland, so that gentleman actually that went outside was SWAT, and he was a staff sergeant. He was one of the first ones in there, and one with the rifle, and he took on some gunfire and got grazed in the ear, and it left and went outside and made that very casual phone call. So that was a frustrating piece of video for me to watch, and for some of the law enforcement individuals that I talked to as well.
Tell me more in terms of what your sources are saying he should have done, and the people in that video should have done.
Well, as we saw, he was one of the people with actual adequate firearm, right? Arredondo had said, nobody has any rifles in here. We all have pistols. We can't go up against a guy with an AR. Well, we know that that gentleman, Canales, we know that he had a rifle with him, and he was more concerned with where he was hit. He couldn't even tell he was hit until he saw the blood on his hand, when, you know, a lot of law enforcement individuals say he should have kept pressing forward. He should have went on and gone into that room because those gentlemen would have followed him. They're saying if one person would have actually made the move to go in there. So he's a gentleman there right behind the guy in the white shirt. He's right there in the all dark colored right there is the guy with the rifle. And so again, they're saying if one person would have gone in there, the rest would have followed. But what one of my sources is saying is they were all followers in that hallway. Not one of them was a leader.
Well, you think about that compared to what we saw in Indianapolis and what a difference it made, that it all sort of speaks for itself. You don't even have to connect the dots. Allie, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Leland.